Good evening and welcome to Garden Hour, held each week at this time. And we welcome those of you who are maybe coming in from the rain and some of you who may have sunshine out there as we do out here in Rapid City. With us, I'm Rhoda Burrows and I'll be your host tonight. I'm a horticulture extension specialist with SDSU. And with us tonight, we have Laura Edwards, our SDSU extension climatologist. And I guess, Laura, you'll be updating us on what's going to be happening in the next few months.
Yeah, we'll talk about the recent 30 days since we last visited and look out towards the rest of the summer and the fall.
Sounds good. And it's also our treat tonight to have with us a graduate student of ours, Kristina Harms. And Christine is going to be talking about her sweet corn and cover crop project. So we look forward to hearing more from you, Kristina. And I'll be talking tonight about odds and ends. those late season, since we've only got one more regular week of Garden Hour, to maybe catch up on some loose ends. Laura, you want to lead us off?
Yep, so I'll talk about kind of a late summer climate update and share maybe a couple personal stories along the way. I know it's kind of peak production for some of us who have vegetable gardens. And this was my zucchini harvest from almost a month ago. And I think I've repeated this 2 or 3 times over by now. I was kind of joking earlier that I have 3 zucchini plants, and that's probably too many for how much we like to eat. But I've been able to share with friends and coworkers and use it up quite a bit. So, and yes, that is a regular 12-inch school ruler at the top, if you see that along the top one there. So yeah, I like it's pretty easy to grow here. I'm up in Aberdeen in Brown County, and so I've had pretty good luck with that. And I think a lot of my other gardening friends have too. So hopefully you guys are having some good weather for zucchini growing too. A couple other things just that I've done over the last couple weeks. I picked my onions, the white onions, oh gosh, maybe almost 3 weeks ago now. I checked them just last night and they're drying down, so they're looking pretty good. And this is my red potato harvest. I still have Yukon Golds, and they're probably ready to pick pretty soon. But I had a pretty fun time growing those this year in the felt potato bags, and they're really easy. I just dumped it out and picked out the potatoes and didn't have to worry about hitting them with little hand trowels or anything like that, and they came out pretty good. And it was my first year growing onions, so I was excited just that I got to grow them. They were really easy this year, but it's been decently wet up here in Aberdeen, so haven't had any drought issues. So maybe it would have been a different story if you're in a droughty area, potentially out west. Speaking of out west, some other kind of not really gardening related, but there have been some cool northern lights lately, and this is kind of a plug for the Mesonet for our weather station network at SDSU. All the stations have cameras on them, and back on August 11th in the evening, there was some really cool northern lights aurora showing, and one of the cameras on the Mesonet on the weather station is able to capture that, with Bear Butte in the background from the Sturgis weather station. So just a reminder to check the weather stations. If you have one near you, which a lot of people do now, they have about 60 of them out around the state. You can compare your rainfall, check for wind, temperature information, all of that. If you're not close to home, maybe you just want to see what the weather is doing back home if you're traveling or camping somewhere. Certainly plug into the Mesonet and check it out. So a lot of good information on there from soil temperature, soil moisture, and so on too. Just looking at the last month, I think I visited with you all last month, or maybe a little while before that, but just looking at the recent history, kind of what's been going on lately, um, up in Brown County where I'm at, and in the northeast corner, been a fair bit wetter than average. Last week, just on a single day, the airport at Aberdeen had 2.68 inches, and that was on Wednesday during the county fair. So if any of you are up in this area, you may know, and it was kind of a muddy mess there for most of the week last week during the fair. Um, but yeah, that's almost like the average for the whole month of August. So that's a pretty wet day here for this part of the state. Also a couple wet spots out in Lawrence and Meade County, really kind of single day events just very recently here. I think that might have been actually from last night that really bumped it up to above average. So you see a lot of areas across the state in the oranges and red colors. All of those have been drier than average for the last 30 days. And so some of those I haven't worried about too much, particularly like the southeast that had such excessive flooding at the end of June. But certainly now the topsoil is starting to dry out. I was down in Mitchell yesterday, and you could tell like some of the grasses were looking a little dry. So I'm guessing those of you who are down in that area are needing to water a little bit more, even though we've had so much moisture. And we've had some localized pockets of heavy rain in the central part of the state as well. But generally, we're seeing a lot of dry conditions there across the central and south, and also out west. So you guys know better than I what's going on out there, but certainly um, a, a, a real different story depending where you are in the state. On the temperature side, we've been really quite moderate for most of South Dakota. So the greens and blues, purples are all cooler than average for the last 30 days. So you may have noticed that with slower crop development, not so much heat stress. Maybe even if you are in a dry area, you maybe haven't had to water as much as if we had some really hot temperatures. Now, certainly we've had a couple hot days in the last month. The one exception to that is the far west. You see the Black Hills in some areas, and those maroon colors are more about 3 degrees above average for the last 30 days. So that's really quite warm compared to average. 3 degrees is kind of a lot when you're looking at 30 days. And so we've seen that kind of show up in the drought picture as well, with some warmer temperatures that are driving some drought concerns out west in the Black Hills. But in general, really nothing really too extreme either way, with that one exception of the heat in the Black Hills. So, and I know it's kind of slowed things down. I know Kristina's going to talk about sweet corn next. I know we have some sweet corn up here in the Brown-Day County area that's still just coming to prime. So it's kind of nice to see that extended season a little bit with those cooler temperatures. Look at moisture side of things. We are, like I said, we are seeing some shallow soils start to dry out. And this is soil moisture shown from the mesonet, from those weather stations all across the state. And the bluer colors are wetter, the oranges and yellows are drier. So to give you some example, some frame there, some reference there. In each one of these, we call it this poker chip map, and each one of those little stacks of chips represents a location, and then each chip or each circle is a different depth. And so, especially in the north central part of the state, you see a lot of the top layer, that 2-inch layer, start to dry out, where you do still have adequate to good moisture at the deeper levels, but starting to dry out at the surface. Similar, some of the areas in the southwest, south central, say in Bennett, Todd, Millette County, starting to see some drier conditions show up there. So it's kind of a good way to keep an eye on what's going on around the state and kind of how you sit relative to others around the area. Kind of talking about soil moisture, we've seen some really dry soils out in the far western part of the state, really approaching wilting point, if not already there. Just right along the state line, along the Montana, Wyoming, Nebraska state line on the western side of the state. And that's where we see the worst drought conditions at the moment with D2 or severe drought conditions on the latest drought monitor as of last week. But certainly that dryness is creeping eastward, so to speak. And like I said, that north central area is another area that we're keeping an eye on for potentially expanding dryness or drought conditions. And I know this has affected a lot on the pasture and hay side for range and more on the livestock side, but I'm guessing a lot of you have had to water a little bit more if you're out in that area as well. So really quite unusual dryness for this season so far. So as we look ahead, are we going to see any change in conditions or what's kind of coming down the pike here? And as we look out about a week and a half or so, a week to week and a half, 6 to 10 days here, we're looking at some cooler temperatures more likely to settle in, at least temporarily, over the northern Rockies, and that would kind of include the far western part of South Dakota too. But the east, you can see more colored in the orange colors, more likely to be warmer than average. So this is the last 5 days in August, essentially, last 4 or 5 days in August. And on the right, looking at precipitation, nothing really clear, nothing really standing out as far as wetter or drier for moisture for that last 4 or 5 days in August. So gray means probably chances are near normal for rainfall for that same time. So that would be that week just leading up to Labor Day, that week of State Fair actually. And then 8 to 14 days out, so 1 to 2 weeks out from today, on the temperature side on the left first, we see kind of this big hole kind of form over the north central states, over the northern plains area, not necessarily leaning warmer or cooler. So hopefully, cross fingers, that means good weather for a real nice state fair and Labor Day weekend. The dates on this would be August 28th to September 3rd, so right over that weekend. Doesn't look exceptionally hot anyway, so hopefully that's good news for those who are be going out to the fair. And precipitation there, slightly leaning towards wetter in the far west, just slightly odds leaning that way. The rest of the state near normal chances of precipitation again. That week leading up to and right over Labor Day weekend. So nothing really extreme sticking out. So kind of keep doing what you're doing, keeping up with the yard and mowing and flowers and gardens and all that kind of stuff. Doesn't look like really anything extreme yet for the next couple of weeks. As we look out ahead to September, we do see generally odds favoring towards warmer than average temperatures. That's the map on the left. Not real high confidence, especially in the north and eastern part of the state, but slightly leaning towards those warmer temperatures. And then on the right, that's the precipitation outlook. And these were just released last week. So these are pretty much hot off the press. And odds leaning towards, or chances leaning towards drier than average for September. So September, again, is not one of our wettest months. We're kind of on the downhill slide, with June being our peak and then kind of stepping down, with winter being our driest season. So we don't anticipate a lot of rainfall in September, and a lot of our yards and gardens are kind of tapering down anyway. So hopefully that's not too bad of news. where you can probably hand water irrigate if you need to extend the season a little bit, but slightly warmer, maybe slightly towards drier side, I guess, is a summary for September. And then September through November, that 3-month period for the fall season. This is what we're looking at with general likelihood, about 70% of La Nina coming into play in the fall season. That can point towards maybe an early, towards some warmer temperatures in the fall season, but not a real strong signal, I'll say. So that is one factor that is in play here, but overall, looking at, again, odds slightly towards warmer temperatures. Not a lot of confidence here in South Dakota, but a lot of things pointing towards warmer. And then the precipitation side, kind of backing off of that drier signal that we saw in September. So it doesn't look like the whole fall season will be dry. Just looks like September by itself seems to lean more on the dry side. So equal chances of wetter, drier, or near average for September through November, through the end of the season here. What does this mean? Potentially a later than average frost. And so this is kind of the question I get this time of year as we get close to Dakota Fest, the big farm show this week, and State Fair, coming up next week. When are we expecting a frost? Well, I think not for a little while yet. Hopefully, cross fingers. There will be some cool temperatures, it looks like there, like I said, in about a week and a half out west, but hopefully not near frost type temperatures. This is the map of the typical first day of 32 degrees. And so if you're in the southeastern part of the state, we're looking at first week or week and a half of October in these kind of medium green colors. This lighter green color, October 2nd to 4th, is more typical. Excuse me. The yellow color, end of September, 1st of October. So September 29th to October 1st is in this yellow color. And then the purples are more in that late September, mid to late September timeframe. So if we do see a frost, in about 4 weeks time, especially in the northwestern part of the state, that's not unusual. But with, again, the outlook showing slightly favoring warmer for September and the fall in general, I might guess that we'll have maybe a typical to maybe later frost this year. So just keep an eye. It's kind of that time of year where you can keep an eye on the daily weather forecast, and if you want to extend your season, cover those tomatoes and whatever you might have out there that you might want to save for a little while longer, because things might warm up again. And if you're interested in historical data on freeze dates, this is a cool tool from the Midwest Regional Climate Center. And gosh, I think I forgot to put the URL on here. But if you look up freeze date tool, you can find this. And this is just showing what are the trends in the first fall freeze. And this is looking at 32 degrees. All the counties in orange. It's kind of hard to see the state outline here, but this is the northern border. This is our eastern border down here, and then over the south. All the counties in orange have been trending towards later frost, and this is since about 1980, this data, 1980 to 2022 or so. And especially up in this kind of northeastern area, Marshall, Day, Brown, Spink County, we're seeing those fall frosts, the first fall frost come even later. And so, again, there's a lot of things in our favor to have kind of a near normal to maybe slightly later fall frost date this year. So optimistic that we'll have a little extra time, as we've had kind of this cool period recently that's kind of slowing things down, but that's still okay too. So with that, that's kind of my prediction there. And I'll leave my contact information up there and answer some questions if there's some questions out there.
Oh, somebody popped in the freeze date tool for us.
Oh,
Thank
yeah.
you, Heidi.
Great. Thanks, Heidi. Oh, and I see lead, yep, had 3 1/3 inches last night in 2 hours. Yeah, I saw some heavy rain reports this morning on cocoa raws. If you guys aren't already signed up for that, that's a really great tool. A great way to keep track of your own precipitation. I know a lot of master gardeners do cocoa raws to measure the rainfall and get some volunteer hours as well, get some volunteer time. But yeah, and I saw Pier also had a 1 1/4 to almost 3 inches
Wow.
on the morning reports today. So yeah, we're starting to see some heavy rainfall. Devil's Tower had quite a severe storm last night. If you're out west, yeah.
When it comes down that quickly, sometimes it doesn't soak in real well.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah. Yeah, and the Mesonet, the weather station in winter in Tripp County captured, I think, 178 in an hour
Wow.
Sunday night. So yeah. Yeah, it's that time of year where you can see some heavy rainfall for sure.
But as long as it's not hail, we're good, right?
Yeah, cross fingers. We've had I didn't show severe weather data. We've had a relatively normal year as far as hail and wind, maybe a little below average for hail. But very quiet tornado season. We've only had 5 tornadoes statewide so far this year, and our average is 30. So a
Really?
very quiet severe
Oh.
weather season this year. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Laura.
So yeah, you're welcome.
Kristina, you're up next. If you want to go ahead and share your screen.
Hello, my name is Kristina Harms. I'm a graduate research assistant with SDSU, working out of the plant science department under Dr. Christine Lang. This year I did some research on sweet corn and did some research on sweet corn in a living mulch system. So sweet corn, it's been domesticated for thousands of years. It was first listed by the U.S. seedsman in 1828 as a very sweet vegetable. It wasn't until the 1900s where sweet corn or corn went from more animal feed to actually marketable feed that people could eat. Sweet corn does have a lot of different varieties with it. The first kind of variety was the sugary, also called the standard sweet corn. It has the highest capacity to transform into starch from milk the fastest, resulting in a shorter harvest window and a shorter eating window. Soon, the sugary enhanced model was discovered, and the sugary enhanced model is the one that most people will recognize. The peaches and cream that people are very familiar with, that is the sugary enhanced model, and sugary enhanced is also what I went with for my project because of the fact that it is such a common one, and it also has creamier textures, tender kernels, and it maintains a longer eating quality, both in the field for a longer harvest window and also longer days that you can eat it after the harvest window. The shrunken was a field corn that contained more sugar than sweet corn. Um, it's called shrunken due to its shriveled appearance. It usually has poor vigor and won't germinate in temperatures below 65 degrees Fahrenheit for the soil, but they do have a longer harvest window than even the sugary enhanced. And the synergistic ones are a sugary enhanced crossed with a shrunken. So it has an elevated sweetness with tender kernel and has the creamy texture still. When planting sweet corn, it's usually recommended to have at least 4 rows of corn and a distance of 1,000 feet so that you're not cross-pollinating with field corn, because any cross-pollination will end up harming the milkiness and the creaminess of the kernels. So you can see that down at the Southeast Research Farm where I'm located, 1,000 feet has a lot of agricultural land in it, so it is really hard to keep that cross-pollination down. In order to keep the cross-pollination down, we did opt for an earlier planting time as possible to try to keep the tasseling dates offset by 14 days. So in the corn growth stages, corn growth, you don't want to try to germinate corn anywhere below 60 degrees Fahrenheit. There are some seeds that will be hardy up to 55 degrees Fahrenheit, but usually 60 to 65 is the recommended seed germination temperature. This usually puts planting, at least for this region down in southeast South Dakota, into mid to late May. Seedlings will usually emerge 4 to 10 days after planting, and a typical planting is at 6 to 8 inch spacing and a 1.5 to 2 inch depth. We planted our corn at 8 inch spacing and at a 1 3/4 inch depth to try to maximize the planting distance, but also give the clover some time to grow back after we strip tilled the fields for corn planting. So the growth stages and how they grow, it highly depends on temperature, water, nitrogen, and other nutrients. And you have kind of the different sets. So you have the vegetation stage where the ear is still forming and the milk kernels are still producing, and then the reproductive stages after the kernels have gone past the milk stage. Sweet corn usually gets harvested at the milking stage, so it doesn't often go into that reproductive stage unless you're trying to get the seeds. And then side dressing or adding extra fertilizer usually occurs between the V6 and V8 stage. So as I was saying, the tasseling stage usually occurs shortly before the first silks appear, and then the milk stage, when sweet corn is harvested, usually occurs 20 to 25 days after the first silks appear. So it is really nice to be able to kind of estimate when you're going to have a sweet corn harvest. You can store sweet corn at 32 to 34 degrees Fahrenheit within an hour after harvest, and maximum shelf life is usually around 5 to 7 days. If you keep the husk on, you can store sweet corn a little bit longer than if it's unhusked. And there's a lot of good ways to eat or process corn for use. I have had a lot of sweet corn, so I have been learning many of them. So some of the research that I've been doing is we're looking at the tillage and clover as a living mulch for sweet corn systems. The clover systems that are in place have been in place for 2 years, giving the clover plenty of time to establish. And we have 3 different types of clover and a bare ground control. So we have white clover, white bichura clover, and red clover. These were chosen because white bichura clover is rhizomatous, and so it spreads via rhizomes. Red clover is a taproot system, and white clover spreads by stolons. So these are just different ways that clover grows to compare them with the corn. One of the reasons that we're growing corn in clover specifically as a living mulch is because we're seeing how well the clover will keep weed suppression down and work as a mulch system so that you don't have to use straw, hay, wood chips, or other mulching systems. One particular thing that I'm interested is looking at the nitrogen levels in the corns, and we're doing that both through different testing systems, but also through the SPAD meter reading. The chlorophyll SPAD meter readings, what I was finding in my research is that plants like to produce as much chlorophyll as possible until there's another limiting factor other than nitrogen, if there's an abundance of nitrogen. And so we're using that to kind of gauge the health of the plants and where they're sitting at. It's not the best study, but it is something that's easy to do in the field since corn is a heavy nitrogen feeder and clover is in the legume family. So anything in the legume family is nitrogen fixing, depending on quite a few different circumstances. We also are doing harvest data and the US marketability of the ears of corn. You can see that there's some different corn ears that were harvested in the bottom right there. And the US marketability has quite a few different standards for the ears of corn, including the kernel fill, the tip fill, straightness of the ear, the milkiness of it, the row straightness, any deformities. So it is a little bit picky and it was a little bit tricky, but I'd say after so many ears of corn, I think that I have a good idea on which corn ears are nice. Yeah, and you can see kind of in the key dates there that the clover was broadcasted. We did a strip till. The no-till that we were looking at wasn't supposed to have any tillage done to it, but from previous years, we knew that no cash crop would grow really easily in the no-till beds. And since we were direct seeding the corn planting, we didn't want to waste an entire bed knowing that nothing would grow. That was why we did the strip till. And then we harvested between between August 1st and August 9th. So just a few weeks ago. Here's some season photos. On the left is Gabby. She's doing biomass, which is taking heights of the clover and weeds. And then we'll also take the plant sample out of the field and weigh it, dry it, and then weigh it so we can get the dry weight to see how much has been within a 25 by 25 centimeter space. And then you can see the corn growing in the bare ground system. Here's some resources that I'll talk about sweet corn. There's quite a few out there. Sweet corn is a very largely grown plant. There's a lot of places that surprised me that grow sweet corn or grow agricultural corn that I did not know about before starting. I would also just like to say a thank you to all of my help that I've had over the summer. I've had some very wonderful coworkers help, and I've also had fantastic master gardener volunteers, all very hardworking and very good at learning and understanding the processes that we've done in corn research. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristina. I've don't see any questions for you, and a reminder to people that you can type your questions into the Q&A box. Just without having processed your data yet, but just being out in the plots, which clover would you pick?
So currently what I've been finding is that the bare ground was constantly ahead of everything else in the growing season. It became mature enough for harvesting the ears approximately 4 to 6 days before any of the other clovers did. And it also was faster at germination and the stages that the corn went through. The second clover that was also the fastest was the red clover, but one of the reasons that happened is because red clover, being a taproot clover, does not spread. It stays in place. So any disturbance of the clover, all of a sudden it's again like bare ground. So red clover is so similar to bare ground that they kind of followed each other. Out of the white and Cura clover, I think they did a really good job in weed suppression. And honestly, when I was harvesting the ears, they also had really good ear quality. It just does create a slower growing season. So if you're trying to get your sweet corn to be the fastest or be the first one to the market, you might not want to choose them, but they didn't harm too much as far as the harvest quality from what I've seen so far. I think someone raised their hand.
Yeah, we do have a couple questions here. I broadcast red clover but got poor germination. Do you have any advice?
Clover really likes rain. They really like a wet season. I know I was not here the past 2 years, but I've heard that for the past 2 years, they've really struggled with the clover getting established, really struggled with keeping it wet enough to have everything go really well. This season, we had such a wet season, I couldn't get in the field for almost 2 weeks, and the clover absolutely loved it.
And I believe we originally drilled our clover in rather than broadcast, so that
Yes.
might be an option, or take a rake if you're doing a smaller area. What have you found most interesting to learn about relating to corn and its applicability to our food supply? That's quite a mouthful there.
I think one of the most interesting things that I found out about corn is that I found an article that was talking about the differences between irrigation fed and rain fed corn. And it had never occurred to me that people completely like drip line irrigated their corn systems, because here in the Midwest, we are mostly rain fed. You might put out some sprinklers if we're not having a good rainfall year. But in the Pacific Northwest, they actually drip irrigate their corn. And that's what the study was talking about, the differences in it. Um, that doesn't quite apply to our food system question, the food system side of it. Um, I think it's interesting to see how much corn really is used by a lot of people. I mean, sweet corn in itself is more for human consumption. So I didn't quite get fully into the agricultural and economical side of sweet corn, as we were more focused on the horticulture cash crop side of it. But it is something that I'm learning excuse me. It is something that I'm learning a little bit about as I continue to do my research.
I've found it interesting in the USDA guidelines for quality that the kernels had to be in straight rows. I never thought about that before.
Yeah, and you don't really think about it when you're eating an ear of corn, but it is really interesting how many ears of corn will be like 90% straight rows, and then there's one kernel out of place that sets off quite a few of them, and then it gets deducted in the USDA quality.
It's for those people that like to eat their corn straight across first instead of around the cob.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's all the questions we have for you for the time being. Again, you're welcome to keep putting your questions in the Q&A if you think about it, either for Laura or for Kristina, and I will take you to
Rhoda, it
the.
looks like there are a couple of hands raised in the
Oh, okay.
the participant list. I'm not sure if they can talk or not.
Let's see if I can, or if Heidi is there. Can you check it out, Heidi?
Yep. We can go to Bob.
No, I was just wondering, it's kind of a trivia question, but how many kernels in a typical ear of corn? I was going to count one the other day, but I cheated. I started eating it before I finished counting.
I think you should have just counted as you ate.
Good answer.
A rough approximation, because I did not count the kernels of corn, but in a good ear of corn, which would be greater than 6 inches in length, you'd probably have, I'd say maybe 20 per row, and you could get easily 10 to 12 minimum around the cob. So whatever that math ends up becoming.
Thank you.
As I mentioned, we're going to be odds and ends. And so here's a to-do list, has an odds and ends. Just some of the things to think about if you haven't already done it. If you have the summer bearing raspberries, once they're done fruiting, you'll notice that they die back, and you can go in and cut those back, and it'll give a little bit more room for the new canes to get some sunlight and some air movement. So that's always a good idea. There's still a little bit more time to divide and move your irises, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. as it cools off, you don't want to do this when it's 90 and 100 degrees, but as it starts to cool off, especially if you start to get a little more rain, although I'm not sure how much of that we'll get, but you can start to seed new lawns or renovate old lawns. Typically, we say late August, early September is the best time to do the cool season grasses. So that's when they're very much more active and growing new roots and so forth. So that's, if you're thinking about doing that, instead of waiting till next spring, now would be a time to do it. And then you want to protect trees in deer areas. And this is why we have the deer will be starting to rub their antlers clean and start to get rambunctious. Yeah, I discovered a couple years ago I waited way too late to protect my tree in the fall. So get out there and do it now if you live in a deer area, and fence them off or put one of the deer guards or trunk guards around the tree, and otherwise you may go out someday like I did and say, oh crap, I did that way too late. So hopefully you'll learn from my bad experience. In September, you can plant and move peonies, and that's really the best time to do it. So start to think if you've had a peony that you wanted to move, or if you've got a really old peony that has never been divided up. You don't need to routinely divide peonies, but you can do it every once, maybe 8 to 10 years or so. So some things to think about coming up. Just a quick word on dividing iris. So you dig them up, and then you want, if you're dividing them up to get new plants or to just spread them around a little bit more, about a 3 to 5 inch long rhizome is what you're aiming for. Just cut it off. Be sure to remove any rotted spots, if there are any rotted spots, or look carefully for iris borers, which is an insect that can get in there and bore holes in, and of course you don't want to replant those. You can also cut them off if you want. It's not required, but 8 to 10 inches or so. When you replant, you want the top of that rhizome just barely showing above ground. If you have heavier ground, you might set it just slightly higher, but you can kind of see, before you dig, take a good look at how it looks, and that's about where you want to put it when you replant it. I threw in this one. I've been enjoying the gooseberries in my backyard. It's finally been a good year for it, and I'm not sure why, because it's been quite dry in my yard, but I have been trying to water it. Gooseberries are one of those sort of forgotten fruit, I think. They're don't make it high in the list of popularity, but they're sort of just a nice little bush to have in your backyard. Mine's on the north side of a fence, so it gets good morning sun, but by 2 o'clock in the afternoon or so, it starts to become shaded. And they can tolerate a fair amount of shade. Like underneath a honey locust tree, they'll still bear pretty well. They're self-fruitful. So you can kind of plant these and just make sure that they're watered now and then, because they don't have real deep roots. I was looking through some information on gooseberries this afternoon and came across something that said Assiniboine women say that gooseberries are good to prevent you from becoming too tired, so that they can give you stamina and strength. And I thought, well, okay, maybe I should plant some more gooseberries. Good cultivars, Porman and Hinamaki Red are two that are just good all around varieties with good fruit quality, and also good disease tolerance. There are American gooseberries that are native to the US or to America, and European gooseberries. If you bring European gooseberries over to the America, they all get powdery mildew very badly. So they've interbred the European and the native of the Americas, and that's where most of these cultivars come from. There's another one that's on the market a lot that you may see it, and it's Pixwell, which bears fairly good, but the fruit quality really isn't that much to write home about. So I would look for one of these other varieties. John's Prairie is another one. It's J-A-H-N Prairie. That has high pine blister rust resistance. So if you're near a five needled pine, you might want to look for that one. Although in general, the gooseberries aren't real susceptible to the white pine blister rust. Other odds and ends. It's sometimes helpful to know if something will ripen after harvest, and the ones here all will, excuse me, will ripen some after harvest. Plums and peaches, so that we don't usually have too many peaches, but plums will ripen after harvest some. Apples will continue to develop some flavor. Cantaloupe, tomatoes, of course, we know. Pears, we know. Winter squash will develop some more sugars usually after harvest. But watermelon do not, nor do strawberries. So you want to make sure that those were ripe at picking, not expected to ripen if it stays on your counter another day or two. They'll just rot there. Same thing with summer squash. I wanted to talk a little bit about potatoes, and I was out at the one of the Rapid City community gardens today, and a woman there had a bucket full of potatoes that were beautiful, great big potatoes, red potatoes. And I thought, well, it's potato digging time, maybe a reminder of this, that potatoes, if you let the tops die first and then dig them a week or two later, that helps set their skins so that they will store much longer. If you're going to use them right away, it doesn't really matter. But and then you can further cure the potatoes by storing right after you dig them. Store them in a dark but well ventilated area. Always store them in the dark at room temperature for a few days, and then put them into as cold a storage as you have it, apart from your refrigerator. So if you've got a basement floor, if you've got a cellar, that's even better. But they'll keep best if you can get it down below 60 degrees. A lot of us don't have that option, so we do what we can. And of course, I think everybody probably knows that we don't want to allow the potatoes to be in the light where they'll develop toxins over time. Whoa. And sometimes my finger gets excited. Also, don't store potatoes near apples or any of those fruits that I just showed you that will ripen after picking, because they're giving off ethylene. And so if you put potatoes in with pears, for example, not just apples, or with cantaloupe, that can cause the potatoes to sprout. So you want to avoid that as much as you can. And then I wanted to highlight again some of our events coming up. This one tomorrow morning. I don't know if you can still register, but you can probably still show up even if it doesn't allow you to register. It is still on, the last I heard. So some fun information going to be provided. Go tour flower farm. That sounds pretty fun to me. And then a little bit further out in September is a soil health and cover crop field day. So you'll learn, and this is in conjunction with the South Dakota Specialty Producers Association. And so you'll learn some about some of our cover crop research, as Kristina just presented, and some of the resources that SPA has as well. And then finally, our specialty crop field day on campus. So you can see the SDSU research that is going on in the specialty crop areas, which is basically horticulture. A lot of vegetable research, a little bit of flower research. And that's Tuesday, September 10th. Again, we prefer that you register ahead of time. And I believe the student farm, which is not the research part, but the educational farm, is also going to have a tour that day starting at 7 p.m. So you can come and see a lot in an afternoon and early evening. And a reminder again, of course, if you have questions during the week that didn't get answered today, you can either email or call any of these 4 locations, and if they'll get back to you with your answers. If they don't know the answers, sometimes it gets fed up to us at the state level. So we encourage you to make use of those. You can even do walk-ins if you call them ahead of time and find out when they're going to be there. And with that, I'll stop sharing. And I see, Kristina, you want to go ahead and answer on air the answer you're typing in?
Yes. So it was asked if sweet corn cross-pollinated with a flower corn, will the corn cob from it still be sweet? I didn't come across in my research too much about flower corn varieties. A lot of the research was talking about that cross-pollination with field corn, but I'm going to say no just because of how much I came across the recommendation and the warning that you need to isolate all of these varieties of sweet corn because they're just so susceptible. And any cross pollination, they will turn starchy. Even the sweet corn, as it cross pollinates with each other, like if you plant some sugary enhanced sweet corn next to a synergistic or next to a standard sweet corn, they even have the chance to cross pollinate and turn starchy. So it's not really worth the risk, but you could do a bit more research into it. The best way is just to offset the planting of the sweet corn and the flower corn so that you have 14 days in between the tasseling time, because especially for the open pollinated where the wind is carrying the tassels, that's just the best way to preserve the milkiness of the sweet corn varieties.
I think we usually say that with Indian corn, which I think would be very close to a flower corn too. So there's a question on gooseberry varieties without stickers. There are some with less stickers and some with more. So you could look for one that has fewer. So not without any, unfortunately, but I have a Hinamaki red and I can pick the fruit from it fairly well without getting stuck, and I'm pretty klutzy, so if somebody was going to get stuck on a gooseberry sticker, I would do it. And you can also pay attention. I have not pruned mine. I hate to admit it. I have not pruned mine for at least 4 or 5 years. And I was just thinking today, I need to make sure I do that next winter, because that'll open it up too and make it a little easier to pick. Any other? Oh, no, I guess we answered that. All right. Any other questions that I've missed? If not, I thank you for coming tonight. Thank you to our panelists, Kristina and Laura. And leather gauntlets works too. Yeah. And thank you for all coming. We invite you back next week for the last session for the summer. There will be some every couple months or so. So keep an eye on that, but make sure that you bring your questions written down for next year, for next week, if you want to make sure to get them answered before the season is over. With that, thank you all.